Successful men don't think like you. My girlfriend said that while we were sitting in a crowded restaurant, surrounded by people celebrating promotions, engagements, and new jobs. I looked at her for a second, then I nodded. Okay. 9 weeks later, she was sitting in her car outside my house asking why I'd stopped fighting for us. The truth, because eventually I realized I wasn't fighting for us. I was fighting for her approval, and those are two very different things. My name is Ryan. I'm 33 years old. I work as a logistics manager for a manufacturing company. I own a modest home, drive a 6-year-old truck, have money in savings, no credit card debt, no financial emergencies, no dramatic lifestyle. Just stability. For most of my adult life, I considered that a success, not because I was rich, because I wasn't stressed. Then I met Qley. At first, Qley seemed to appreciate exactly that. She told me she liked how grounded I was, how calm I was, how I always seemed to have a plan. The things that attracted her initially would eventually become the things she criticized. But I didn't know that yet. When we started dating, everything felt normal, healthy. We talked about future goals, travel plans, buying a house together someday, marriage, children, the usual conversations couples have when they see a future together. Looking back, the first warning sign appeared about 8 months into the relationship: comparison. Constant comparison. Qley compared everything: restaurants, cars, apartments, jobs, vacations, but mostly people. There was always someone doing better, someone making more money, someone living a bigger life. At first, I ignored it. Everybody compares occasionally. The problem was that Qley never seemed satisfied. No matter how well things were going, there was always another person doing slightly better, and somehow that became the standard. The second red flag arrived through her coworker, Derek, not because anything inappropriate was happening, because Qley wouldn't stop talking about him. Derek had started a consulting business on the side. Apparently it was growing quickly. Every week there was another Derek story, another Derek success, another Derek achievement. I remember one evening we were having dinner when she suddenly said, "Derek just bought a condo downtown." I nodded. "That's great." Then came the follow-up. "He takes risks." I smiled. "Sounds like it." She didn't smile back. Instead, she stared at me for a second, long enough for me to understand what she meant. I ignored it. That became another habit, ignoring things I should have addressed. The third red flag arrived after I declined a promotion. The promotion would have increased my income significantly, but it would have required constant travel, longer hours, less family time, less freedom. I thought about it for weeks, then declined. Because money wasn't worth sacrificing everything else, at least not to me. When I told Qley, she looked genuinely disappointed, not concerned, disappointed. "You turned it down." "Yeah. Why?" I explained my reasoning: work-life balance, quality of life, long-term happiness. She listened, then said, "I would have taken it." That conversation should have ended there. It didn't. Over the next month, she brought it up repeatedly. Every disagreement somehow led back to ambition. Every future conversation somehow returned to success, or more specifically, my lack of it, at least in her eyes. Then came Melissa, Qley's best friend. Melissa believed life was a competition. Everything had to be bigger, more expensive, more impressive. Every time Qley spent a weekend with Melissa, she came home dissatisfied. Not angry, dissatisfied. Like she just attended a seminar explaining why her current life wasn't good enough. One Friday evening, we all went to dinner together. Halfway through the meal, Melissa started talking about a guy she was dating. Apparently, he'd invested in several businesses, owned rental properties, made excellent money. The conversation lasted 20 minutes. By the end, I felt like I was listening to a financial resume. On the drive home, Qley suddenly said, "You know what I admire about people like that?" I glanced over. "What?" "They refuse to settle." The comment sat in the car for several seconds. I knew exactly what she meant. Pretended I didn't. Because I wanted peace. The problem with choosing peace over confrontation is that eventually you lose both. A few weeks later, we attended a birthday party hosted by one of her coworkers. Most of the guests worked in finance. real estate, consulting, high-income professions. At one point, someone asked what I did for work. I answered, normal conversation. Then Chloe laughed and said, Ryan's happy staying comfortable. The group laughed politely. I smiled. But something about that comment stayed with me, because it wasn't a joke, it was an evaluation, and worse, she wanted an audience. Later that night, I brought it up, calmly, respectfully. Her response was immediate. Oh my God. What? It was a joke, I nodded. Okay, you're too sensitive. There it was, the beginning of a pattern. Every concern became an overreaction. Every feeling became a flaw. Eventually, I stopped bringing things up, not because they didn't matter, because the conversations never went anywhere. Then came the night everything changed, the night that became the title of this story. We were sitting in a restaurant after meeting some of her co-workers for drinks. Most of the conversation revolved around careers, investments, business ideas, money, the usual topics. On the drive home, Chloe seemed unusually quiet. Then suddenly she looked over at me and said, Honestly, Ryan, successful men don't think like you. The words hung in the air. For a few seconds, neither of us spoke, and for the first time in our relationship, I stopped making excuses for her. For a few seconds after Chloe said it, I just kept driving. No argument, no reaction, no dramatic response, just silence, because honestly, I was tired. Not tired of the comment, tired of the pattern. The comment was simply the latest version of something I'd been hearing for months. Different words, same message. You aren't enough. You could be doing more. You should be somebody else. Eventually, I asked, That's really how you see me? Chloe immediately sighed, the same sigh I'd heard dozens of times before. Oh my God. What? Why do you always take things personally? I almost laughed, because I wasn't sure how someone was supposed to take it, but I didn't argue. I simply nodded and focused on the road. The next morning she acted like nothing had happened. No apology, no explanation, nothing, just coffee, breakfast, weekend plans. As if she hadn't spent the previous evening questioning my entire approach to life. That bothered me more than the original comment, because it told me something important. She genuinely believed she'd done nothing wrong. Over the next several weeks, the comparisons became more frequent and more direct. One evening, we were sitting on the couch watching television when Chloe suddenly showed me a social media post. It was Derek again. Of course it was. Apparently, his consulting business had landed a major contract. The post included pictures of a new luxury SUV, a downtown condo, and a celebration dinner. Chloe stared at the photos, then shook her head. That's what confidence looks like. I looked at her. What does that mean? She shrugged. Nothing. But it wasn't nothing. It was never nothing. Everything came with a hidden message. And eventually I got tired of pretending otherwise. Around that same time, Melissa became more involved. Every bad idea seemed to start with Melissa. One Saturday, Chloe came home after spending the day with her. The moment she walked through the door, I knew something was wrong. She looked frustrated. Not at me specifically, at life, at circumstances, at everything. Eventually she sat down and said, Melissa thinks we're too comfortable. I looked up from my laptop. We, she nodded. Us, I waited. Then she continued. She thinks people stop growing when they get comfortable. The funny thing, Melissa wasn't exactly thriving herself. She was constantly changing jobs, constantly changing apartments, constantly chasing some new opportunity. But somehow she had become the expert on success, and Chloe listened to her more than she listened to me. That realization stuck with me because it wasn't really about Melissa. It was about influence. The people around Chloe kept reinforcing the same idea. That stability was weakness. That contentment was failure. That peace meant a lack of ambition. And eventually she started believing it. The next major conflict happened at her parents' house. We were having dinner one Sunday afternoon when Chloe's mother started talking about one of her friend's sons. Apparently he owned multiple businesses, several properties, and spent half the year traveling. The conversation felt strangely familiar, because every story ended the same way, with someone else's life being presented as a standard, At one point, Chloe's mother smiled and said, "Some people are just wired for bigger things." Then she glanced at me, not openly, just enough. And Chloe noticed, but she didn't say anything, didn't defend me, didn't change the subject. She simply let it happen. That bothered me more than the comment itself, because silence can be agreement. And lately Chloe seemed to agree with everyone except me. A few days later, I finally tried having a serious conversation, not an argument, a conversation, calm, respectful, direct. I explained how the comparisons were affecting me, how every discussion seemed to become a measurement, how exhausting it felt to constantly defend perfectly reasonable life choices. At first, Chloe listened. Then came the response I'd started expecting. "You're being insecure." I blinked. "What?" "You take everything as criticism." There it was, again, not accountability, deflection, not responsibility, blame. The problem wasn't what she'd said. The problem was how I reacted to it, at least according to her. For nearly an hour we went in circles. Every concern became evidence of insecurity. Every example became overthinking. Every feeling became a flaw. Eventually I stopped talking, not because she convinced me, because I realized she wasn't listening. She was defending. There's a difference. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. Over the following week, something changed inside me. Slowly, quietly. I stopped explaining myself, stopped defending my career, stopped justifying my decisions, stopped trying to convince Chloe that my life had value. Because honestly, if 2 years together hadn't convinced her, nothing would. And strangely enough, the less I chased approval, the better I felt. The constant pressure started disappearing. The constant need to prove myself started fading. For the first time in months, I felt peaceful. Chloe noticed almost immediately. One evening, she looked up from her phone and asked, "Why are you being weird lately?" I looked at her. "Weird?" "Yeah." I shrugged. "I don't know." She studied my face, like she was trying to figure something out. The truth was simple. I wasn't becoming distant. I was becoming detached. And those are very different things. Then came the conversation that ended everything, at least emotionally. We were sitting in the living room after dinner. The atmosphere felt tense. Neither of us had much to say. Eventually, Chloe crossed her arms and sighed. Then she delivered the sentence she'd probably been moving toward for months. "If you're happy thinking small, maybe we're just not compatible." The room went completely silent. A year earlier, I would have argued, defended myself, explained my goals, tried to prove my value. This time, I simply nodded, then said, "Okay." And for the first time since the comparison started, Chloe looked genuinely afraid. When I said okay, Chloe looked like she'd misheard me. For a few seconds she just stared, waiting, expecting something, an argument, a defense, a promise, anything. Instead she got silence. "What do you mean okay?" I shrugged. "If that's how you feel." The expression on her face changed immediately, not anger, confusion, because for nearly 2 years every disagreement had followed the same script. She criticized, I explained. She compared, I defended. She pulled away. I moved closer. The pattern always ended with me trying harder. This time it didn't, and she wasn't prepared for that. The conversation ended awkwardly. No shouting, no dramatic exit, nothing you'd see in a movie. Just two people sitting in a room realizing something fundamental had changed. The next morning, Chloe texted me before work, then again at lunch, then again that evening. Nothing unusual, except the frequency. For months, she'd acted emotionally distant. Now suddenly, she wanted connection, the same connection she'd spent months taking for granted. A few days later, she called while I was having dinner with my brother. "What are you doing?" "Dinner." "Where?" I told her. There was a pause. Then, "Who else is there?" I smiled slightly, not because the question bothered me, because it felt familiar. For months I'd been treated like I was unreasonable anytime I asked basic questions. Now she wanted details, the difference. I wasn't looking for reassurance anymore, and she was. That shift changed everything. The following week brought karma wave one, the practical consequence. For nearly a year, Chloe had assumed we'd move in together. We'd talked about it, looked at places, discussed neighborhoods, nothing official. But the plan existed, at least in her mind. One Saturday afternoon she brought it up. "So are we still looking at apartments this summer?" I looked up from my laptop. "No," the answer came out calmly, almost casually, but it hit her hard. "What do you mean, no? I don't think we should move in together." The room went completely silent. For the first time, consequences entered the conversation. Real consequences, not emotional ones, practical ones, the kind that can't be explained away, the kind that force reality into the room. She stared at me, like she genuinely couldn't believe what she was hearing, because deep down she never thought I'd leave. She thought I'd improve, earn more, work harder, become the person she wanted. But she never imagined I'd stop participating altogether. A few days later she called me crying, not dramatically, genuinely. "I don't understand what's happening." I listened quietly, then answered honestly, "I think you do," because I believed she did. People usually know exactly where things started going wrong. They just don't expect consequences. Then came Karma Wave 2, the social fallout. And like most social fallout, it happened naturally, not because I exposed Qley. Because people pay attention, mutual friends noticed something was different. Questions started appearing. Plans started changing. Eventually, people learned what had happened, not the dramatic version, the real version. The version where Qley spent months comparing her boyfriend to wealthier men. The version where every achievement became insufficient. The version where appreciation slowly disappeared. The surprising part, most people didn't agree with her. Even some of her closest friends, especially after hearing the full story. One evening my friend Marcus called me. "You hear about Qley?" "No." "She got into a huge argument with Melissa." That surprised me. Melissa was usually the source of the bad ideas. "What happened?" Marcus laughed. "Melissa told her she pushed a good guy too far." I sat quietly for a second, because that sentence perfectly summarized everything. Not too far toward success. Too far away from gratitude, too far into comparison, too far into entitlement. Eventually even Melissa could see it. Then came Karma Wave 3, the emotional consequence, the hardest one. About 7 weeks later, Qley asked if we could meet. I agreed. We met at a small coffee shop we'd visited dozens of times during our relationship. The moment she sat down, I noticed something different. No confidence, no criticism, no comparisons, just sadness. For a while, neither of us spoke. Then she finally asked, "Did you really feel like I never appreciated you?" The question surprised me, not because it was difficult, because it was honest. I thought about it, then nodded. "Yeah." The tears appeared immediately. Not manipulative tears, not strategic tears. The kind that come when reality finally wins. For nearly an hour we talked. Honestly. More honestly than we had in a very long time. Eventually, Qley admitted something. Not about me, about herself. She'd become obsessed with measuring life through other people. Other people's promotions. Other people's salaries. Other people's houses. Other people's relationships. And somewhere along the way, she stopped appreciating her own. Then she said something I'll never forget. "I thought pushing you would make you better." I nodded, because I believed her. That was the tragedy. She wasn't trying to destroy the relationship. She genuinely believed she was helping. But encouragement and criticism aren't the same thing. Support and comparison aren't the same thing. And eventually she stopped knowing the difference. Then she said something even more important. "I never thought you'd stop trying." There it was. The truth, the thing that sat underneath everything else. She thought my patience was unlimited. My loyalty was guaranteed. My presence was automatic. And eventually that certainty made her careless. Because people stop protecting things they believe they can't lose. A month later, we officially ended the relationship. Quietly, respectfully, no screaming, no revenge, no dramatic confrontation, just acceptance. The relationship had been ending for months. We were simply acknowledging it. The following year became one of the best years of my adult life. Not because I became rich. Not because I suddenly transformed into the man Qley wanted. Because I stopped measuring myself through someone else's approval. I focused on work, accepted new opportunities, spent more time with family, started traveling, built stronger friendships. Most importantly, I found peace, real peace. The kind that comes from knowing your value doesn't depend on somebody else's scoreboard. Almost a year later, I ran into Qley unexpectedly. We talked for a few minutes. Nothing emotional, nothing dramatic. Before leaving, she smiled sadly and said, "You know what's funny?" "What?" She looked down and laughed softly. "I spent so much time trying to find someone more successful." I waited. Then she shook her head. "I never realized I already had someone dependable." For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then we wished each other well and went our separate ways. And as I walked away, I realized something. The relationship didn't end because Qley said successful men don't think like me. It didn't end because of one comment, or one argument, or one bad night. It ended because of hundreds of small choices, hundreds of moments where comparison replaced appreciation, hundreds of times respect became conditional. That sentence didn't destroy the relationship. It simply revealed a problem that had been growing for a very long time. And once I finally saw it clearly, I stopped chasing. That's when everything changed.